it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 25 of my 2020 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a scene card using a whole bunch of Lawn Fawn sets, including Very Happy Holidays, Cheery Christmas, Yeti or Not, Holiday Helpers, and Simply Celebrate Winter. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some neenah Solar White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my polar bear, and for him I'm using W00, W1, and W3. I'm going to use that W3 very sparingly because I don't want him to get too dark, I don't want him to look too gray, I just want him to have a little bit of dimension on him. So I'm laying in some shadows on the sides of his face and the undersides of his arms, between his legs and under his scarf. And then I'm going to take that W1 and begin to blend that out. I'm still going to stick very close to the black line because I want to leave a lot of white space. That's going to help him to look like a white polar bear. So then I'll come in with that W00 and just soften the edge of the W1. I'm going to flick that into the white areas and then leave a lot of that white space to be my highlight. I'll make sure to blend out the shadows under his scarf as well, and then I'll move on to my reindeer. And for that I'm using E50, E51, and E53 for his little face and tummy. So I use that E53 from the top sides of his face and also right up under his head where his head would be casting a shadow down onto his belly. And then I blended that out with the E51, and then I'll finish with the E50. And I did use these colors on the insides of his ears as well. And then while I have those markers out, I also just wanted to use that E50 to add a little bit of shading to the marshmallows and the whipped cream in the two mugs. I'm going to keep the E53 and add in the E55 and the E57 for the rest of the reindeer. So now the E57 becomes my darkest and the E53 my lightest. So I'm starting with that E57 and laying in some shadows right up where his ears are, and also a little bit on the bridge of his nose and on his shoulders and the bottom edge of his tummy and legs. And then I'm going to start to blend that out with the E55. And then I will use the E53 as my lightest. Now I will say that the E55 and the E53 sometimes do not like to play together nicely. Occasionally I can get them to work, especially if the area for the E53 is really small. So I knew I was taking a risk when I decided to go with this combination, but it just looks so good for deer. But today was not one of those days where they wanted to play nicely. You can see especially on his forehead, it just doesn't look nice. On the arms, it's not as bad, but on the forehead, it just didn't look right. To fix everything, as you probably know if you've been watching my channel, I often do a second layer of coloring on my critters or my images, especially if it's a darker color. Like I did not do a second layer on the polar bear because I didn't want him to be any darker. But for this reindeer, I did do a second layer, and I just used the E55 and the E57 in this case, and I skipped the E53 completely. For his antlers and hooves, I'm going to use the E57 again, but add in the E59 for a little extra depth. And because the areas that I'm coloring are so small, 2 shades are going to be fine. So I just used a little of that E59 as my darkest, and when I'm putting that on his antlers, I'm just being really sparing and using the very tip of my marker so I can get a nice thin little line because its space is so thin to fit both colors. And then I'll go in with that E57 and just blend everything together. For the squirrels, I'm using E11, E13, E15, E17, and E19. And I know that might seem like a lot of marker shades for a small critter, but I'm actually using mainly the 3 darker shades on the outside of the body and then the 2 lighter shades on the belly, and the E13 is going to kind of transition between those areas. So I started out with that E19 and put a shadow down their back and on their hindquarters to kind of separate it from the belly, and on their arms and the bottom of their tail. And then I began to blend that out with the E17. And now I'm taking the E15. I'm going to connect the arm to the rest of the body, bring that color up over the face and the rest of the tail. And now I'm coming in with that E13, and I'm going to finish up the face and then start to create that transition into the lighter tummy with that E11. And I did the second squirrel off screen because I did them both exactly the same. For the little snowman, I used BG10 to add just a little frosty glow to him. And he is from that Simply Celebrate Winter, so I just selectively stamped the last one in the row. I masked off the one next to him, and that way I could just get the one that I wanted. I used R12 to give all of the critters a little rosy cheek. And now I'm moving on to their accessories. So I used the R12, R21, and R22 to color in the mug. So the R22 is my darkest, and then I blended it out with the R21, and then the R12 for my highlight. I also did the top stripe on the snowboard just by putting the darkest colors on both ends and blending toward the center. And I did the glass of the snow goggles as well. This time I just put the darkest on the bottom and then a little bit higher on the right, and then blended up with the other 2 shades. The next combo that I'm using is BV01, BV02, and BV04, and I'm going to color in the other little mug. I'm doing it in the opposite direction since that's the way that this mug is facing, and it will be in the hands of the squirrel that is next to it, so his body would be casting a shadow on the left hand side. And then I'm also going to do the scarf on the polar bear. So I put a little bit of darkness on both sides, and then I kind of went in the bottom center of the part that's kind of flipped over, and I'm trying to make it look like it's kind of flipped up at the top and at the ends. So that's the look that I was going for there. Purples can be difficult to blend, so I don't use them often, even though I absolutely love the color purple. But I decided to go for it here. But when I finish all of the first layers here, I will do a second layer on all of these purple items off screen. My last color combo is BG53, BG45, and BG49. So in this case, the BG49 is my darkest, so I'm using that to lay in some shadow on the back and the crease of my polar bear's little ice skates. And then I'm blending that out with the BG45, and then I'll use the BG53 as my highlight. And then I will color the bottom stripe of the snowboard with these shades, just doing it in the same way that I have the rest of the stripes, with the darkest color on the outside and the highlight in the center. And then I'm also going to do the little goggles, the surround area, the 2 little straps on the sides, and then also the frame around the glass. For the frame around the glass, I just used the BG53, and then I'll do the little snowman's scarf with these shades as well. I just thought these colors would be a fun mix for a non-traditional holiday card. So once I have all of that finished, I am going to go back and color in the inside of the polar bear's ears because I forgot to do those, and then I'll trim these out with their matching dies. For my background, I have die cut a whole bunch of pieces here using the stitched tree border to cut out of narwhal cardstock. I also cut a piece of the Snow Day Remix pattern paper using the large stitch rectangle stackables. I used the lake die from the Bayou backdrops to cut out of mermaid cardstock, and then I used the stitch hillside borders to cut down 2 snowdrifts out of white cardstock. So I'm going to start by adhering that bokeh pattern paper to my card base, and that is going to create a nice snowy background. I just love this pattern paper. Then I'm going to take one of the hillside borders and I'm going to glue that down on top of the stitched tree border. One of the stitch hillside borders in that die set actually matches this hillside perfectly, so I made sure to use that one. So I glued that over top and then just cut off the excess narwhal cardstock from the bottom. So I'm going to get that where I want it on my card front, and then I'll glue that down into place. I'm also going to add just the tiniest bit of glue behind the trees so that they don't end up popping up or getting bent in the mail or anything. So I just added just the barest amount so that it would press those down. And then I'm going to line that up towards the center of the card. And I will grab an acrylic block and set that over the trees just to help them hold down until they are glued into place. In the meantime, I'm going to take that lake die and I'm going to pull out one of these little swirl marks from Mice on Ice. I'm going to stamp that using Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that holds great to embossing powder. So the embossing powder I'm using is the Wow Superfine Silver Pearl. And I like this one for something like this because it's not quite white, it's just more of like a pearly shine. So it'll work great for this little ice skating mark on the ice skating rink. So once I've coated that and tapped off the excess, I'll just bring my heat gun to that and melt it until all of that powder is nice and shiny. And there you can see how that catches the light with that little pearlized shine. And then I'm taking Lawn Fawn's bubblegum ink and I'm stamping my sentiment. This is actually not one of the snowdrifts. This is the piece that's left over from die cutting that. So I will end up trimming that down later on. But in the meantime, I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI so that I can stamp on the inside. And for that, I'm using Lawn Fawn's Peacock ink. And I'm using the Simply Celebrate Winter again to stamp the whole row of snowmen and the Season's Greetings sentiment that comes in that set. I'm going to take that pond image and glue that to the bottom of my snowdrift. I wanted it to be in the lower right hand corner. So I'm going to adhere that just where I want it and wait for that glue to firm up, and then I'll trim off the excess with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. Then I'll add foam tape to the back of that piece so that it can be popped up for a little bit of dimension. So I just peeled off those release papers and lined it up with the bottom 3 edges of the card and pressed that down into place. So now I'm just trying to figure out the layout for my images. So the first image I'm going to add is the polar bear, since he's the one who's going to be leaving that little ice trail on the ice. So I'm adding liquid glue to the back of him except for his head. For that I used foam tape so that it would be on the same level as it's extended beyond the snowdrift that's popped up. And then I'm going to do the same with my reindeer. So I added a bit of foam tape to the back of his head as well. And he's going to go towards the top left, but I'm going to save a little bit of room on his left for his gear because I'm imagining that he was snowboarding and he had a little bit of an accident. So I'm going to put his snowboard sticking out of the snow at a little bit of an angle, and then I'll have his goggles kind of tilted also to the other direction. In the lower left hand side, I'm going to add my 2 squirrels, and they're going to be kind of facing each other and having a little bit of hot cocoa. So I'm going to put the mugs in their hands so that they're kind of clinking glasses. So my idea for this card was not Christmas necessarily, but maybe like the holiday time in between Christmas and New Year's. And all of these friends have celebrated with their family, and now they are going to the park to just have fun and do all those wintertime things. So snowboarding, ice skating, drinking hot cocoa, and then of course they had to build a snowman while they were out having fun as well. So I added this little guy up next to the tiny tree. And now I'm going to take my sentiment that I've trimmed down with an everyday sentiment banner. I'm just going to figure out where I want to put that. I did trim down the right hand side and then pop that up with some foam tape. And I thought I was done, but that area between the bear and the right hand side of the card just looked so empty. So I decided to stamp out one of the mice from Mice on Ice, and I'm going to color him quickly so that I can add him to the card. And since I already had warm grays, browns, reddish browns represented on the card, I decided to do cool grays for this guy. So I pulled out C0, C1, C3, and C5 and laid in a shadow on the right hand side down his back and the underside of his arm, the back of his face, and onto his ears with that C5. I'm blending forward with the C3, and then I'll use the C1 to bring that all the way up to his belly. I'm also going to color in most of his face and the rest of his ear. And then I'll just use that C0 for his belly and the very tip of his nose. I'll bring in R12, R21, and R22 so that I can do the inside of his ear and his nose and also his little scarf. I just decided to stick to the same color palette that I'd already been using. I thought it was missing a little bit of pink on that right hand side anyway, so it was a good opportunity to use that. And then for his little skates, I pulled out the BV02 and the BV04 again. So I trimmed him out with his matching die, and I'm going to glue him down in that space between the bear and the right hand side of the card. And I feel like it just needed that. There was something missing, and that just kind of solved that spatial issue for me. So now I'm ready to finish off the card with some Stardust stickles. I'm going to add it to the snowboard and to the glass of the goggles and the marshmallows and the whipped cream on the mugs of hot cocoa. I also decided to add it to the top edge of the snowdrifts. So I'm just going to follow that stitching detail on the top edge there. And then I also decided to add it to the scarves on all of the critters who are wearing one. So the mouse, the polar bear, and the little snowman. So I'm going to pick that up to the camera so you can see how it catches the light and give you another peek at the inside. And that is going to complete day 25. So this is not the end of the series. I still have several cards coming. So make sure that you're subscribed and that you've rung that notification bell so you know when I've posted a new one. And make sure that you give the video a like if you enjoyed it as well. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, you'll find them listed and linked below the video. And if you want to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos from previous years of holiday card series I thought might also interest you. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.